Thank you all for coming. It's great to be here. It's no accident that we're sitting in this room full of broken objects. We'll get to that soon. But I suppose the first thing is I need to retire now my British passport, my European passport. I'm going to ask Dr. Siggers to create a special section in this museum for these old passports, which will be no more of use anyway. But thank you, Trudy, and again, good morning. I'd also like to thank the rest of my MEDstudio crew, some of whom are here today. If you can just raise your hands if you're here. There's a few of you. Great, thank you. They're really what it's all about. And we're an unconventional team for a medical and health professionals-based school in that we're not only comprised of clinicians and medical researchers, but also directly and indirectly through multiple collaborations with artists and designers of many types, including those in fashion, graphics, textiles, interiors, industrial design and architecture, as well as in journalism and engineering. And we've just recruited a resident cultural anthropologist, Hilary J., where is she? She's right there, who co-founded Design Philadelphia 11 years ago. So when I asked Hilary what she thinks design means and why healthcare might need it, she said her fallback answer, I think from her college application essay, she's a Penn, it's true, isn't it? She's a Penn grad, was design is the single thread connecting everything. It's as simple as a paperclip, as complex as an urban plan, as political as a country's flag, and as personal as, and then fill in the blank. And my blank, the immediate blank, to continue that was, could be your daily routine, crossing the street, filling in a form, visiting your doctor. In fact, design dictates how well we live and die, and surely that's the broadest definition of what healthcare is about. And if that is broken, then we must fix it. Let's see if I can do this new. Oh, there's Hilary, to embarrass her even further. There we go. So, you know, Angela Davis's quote also speaks quite well of our mission, but more specifically for us, we aim not only to identify tough problems within the existing healthcare system and then to deliver appropriate low and high-tech solutions. And this low-tech, high-tech thing, especially sort of with the toys that clinicians imagine they can use within design, we're very much about, it's about the collaboration as much as the technology, and we're very much about that at MEDstudio. So we want to deliver, though, appropriate solutions to healthcare workers, patients, and the general public, but not just that, but also to find new ways of engaging them through the lenses of art and humanities and design to collectively promote health and wellness. This is a photograph that appeared online. I think John Geeting modified it, but it's from Carl Huff, showing the viaduct section of the rail park. So our project is one of our collaborative projects. So our projects are multi-scalar and range from redesigning the smallest component of a surgical kit in the emergency department to creating grand civic gestures that stimulate urban renewal and changes in behavior, such as this collaboration with Friends of the Rail Park, which hopes to use design to embed health and wellness into that future site, but more on that soon. So that seems like obvious. It's a park, so people are going to get healthy. Well, in fact, in general, first of all, what's going to happen to those people around the park? Where are they going to move? Because they probably will be moved. If they stay, what's going to happen to their health? But also just everything from the lighting on the rail park, which we think we can have a part in based on very basic neurobiological studies, to what you feel or sense as you touch the railings even. All of that can be designed and used to promote health, and we're hoping to bring some of those types of ideas to the discussion. So while I'm here as well, I again like to thank Dr. Julian Siggers, director of this world-class museum, for providing this astonishing space. If there's time, please walk back there. We're fortunate enough to be obviously surrounded by these incredible works of art, ancient art, many of which are, this is my cheesy bit, broken. And although out of context, they remain priceless and have no lesser value to history, society, or to our futures. And it's to that general theme that I'd like to loosely frame this talk. That is, how might we, as healthcare professionals, immerse ourselves in art, design, and other highly creative endeavors that were purposefully placed outside of conventional Western medicine in the early 20th century to bring about radical change of a system that is generally considered to be, by most, if not all, to be broken, including doctors, yet which nevertheless is crucial to each of our valuable lives. And I should point out that this talk is as much about that journey of collaboration rather than the products of MEDstudio. We can talk about those. We have many products, but this is about really how to collaborate across these wide disciplines so that design can have a voice in medicine and vice versa. And by the way, that's Sylvester Stallone's broken neck x-ray. Just to remind you, it seems like if you don't have a cheesesteak or a Rocky thing, we're not in Philadelphia. If you wish you knew Philly, this is part of their new campaign. Anyway, so before I move on to the truly depressing part of the talk, apart from the Brexit thing, how many of you are trained or work in the creative arts or humanities? So that's going to be, okay. How many of you are in the sciences or in a medical field? 4 people, me as well. And how many of you are professionally connected to both? Okay, that's about right. So, and I imagine that faculty in my group are probably the both majority. So, as expected, most people identify with a single group. Yet, in fact, we start off together at an early age, driven by extrinsic and intrinsic forces, including genetics and epigenetics and environment, situation, and necessity. We gradually begin to divide and funnel and filter into silos of specialization. And don't get me wrong, I mean, specialization is a necessary component of scholarship, the pursuit of knowledge, change, beauty, truth, invention, etc. But what if that very same and necessary system of specialization, which exists in all of our professions, because I do want my doctor to know everything about the heart and vasculature if he's a cardiologist, for example, and I want a New York-raised, RISD-trained ID grad to have designed my sofa, and to have lived in Milan, perhaps. But what if that system was denying us the ability to see and embrace ourselves, or embrace otherness, or to hear difference, or to communicate at all across linguistic and other so-called boundaries? What might happen if we simply cannot see, not purposely, but because we're literally unable to recognize difference? Because we've either never experienced it or because we just don't know how to see it. Might these and other deficits in our senses or perception account, in part, for us living in a country where the third leading cause of death is that caused by a medical process gone awry or a professional making a mistake? So this is fact. 12,000 of you, us, will die from unnecessary surgery each year, whereas 7,000 of your lives will end in medication error. 20,000 of you will cease to be because of so-called errors in hospitals, other errors in hospitals, and 80,000 of you will die due to infections in hospitals. 106,000 of you will die due to the negative effects of drugs, bringing the massive total, and this is an underestimate, according to the American Medical Association, to 225,000 deaths a year. So some other deficits, bits that are broken to consider. Might the inability to be seen or to receive empathy account for the fact that most doctors choose to die at home peacefully, surrounded by their memories and loved ones, whereas 75% of the rest of us will die in a machine-filled, sterile environment, often alone and connected to one or more tubes? Well, that time, there's another factor, and financial constraints imposed by insurance companies, we know that's the case, have resulted in a system where a doctor will interrupt a patient upon first meeting them within, how long do you reckon it takes a doctor, and I know my guys know this, how long before a doctor interrupts you when they first meet you in a diagnosis? Any guesses? Throw it.
3 seconds.
Okay, little high, but not bad. I want something to say, 10 minutes is 23 seconds. Or perhaps time and financial constraints result in an astonishingly low recruitment rate. For example, we learned this week, only 4% of people actually enroll in clinical trials that are available for them for cancer treatment. There's no placebo in cancer trials, so this is life or death stuff. So all of that being said, most doctors and other healthcare professionals, they are humanists, they're idealists, who do all they can to help. And there's no denying that modern medicine's a miracle. And if you just consider this again, since we're here, the culture that gave rise to these surroundings, most ancient Egyptians were unlikely to live beyond 40 years of age, and I think King Tutankhamun lived to about 18 years of age with all his infinite wealth. And this can be compared to today's life expectancy of 83 years for women and 79 for men in the US, and closer to a century or more for most British royals. And clearly within the populace, we're heading in the right direction, at least, as we'd hope. So there goes my knighthood. But it's not just about living longer, it's also about how we live and die, our quality of life. As I inferred just a moment ago, the apparent decline in care happens in the background where empathy from doctors to patients, starting from day one in medical school, falls over time. And so in spite of the incredible advantages afforded by our ability to collect masses of critical information about the patient, the current system is inadvertently swamping our medical professionals with the need for unneeded tests, often based on guesswork, and tablets and other technologies, the necessary and inevitable bling that accompanies modern medicine, which collectively further hampers doctors from interacting directly with their patients using the most basic of senses, such as those needed for looking at the patient rather than their notes, those needed for listening, deep listening, to make the most of those 23 seconds if that's all you've got, and touch, not only the iPad, but also the iPad screen, but also the patient as a valuable way to comfort and diagnose. But with the advent of telemedicine and other technologies, holography, haptic, and other advanced practices and technologies, we should be able to soon impart these senses upon patients and vice versa, even over long distances. Yet we believe that this will need close collaboration with artists and designers, given that these are the professionals who intuitively and habitually fine-tune and pay the greatest attention to these senses in often an applied and humanistic way. And we already know that when practiced in a heightened sense way, in the context of medicine, the accentuation of senses can have noticeable and positive effects on clinical skills. For example, I've searched and searched for this study, and I do know they did this up there. A recent study to be published between the Philadelphia Museum of Art and the University of Pennsylvania showed that guided deep looking, this is with medical students, at art improves empathy and other clinical skills. And we also know that reading Danielle Steele versus Shakespeare has a negative effect on empathy, or that jazz taught to med students by Wynton Marsalis improves their improvisational clinical skills. But what of design and why design? Before describing that in a bit more detail, I'd just like to show a short film, a few minutes, that was made by Parallax Collaboration, a new media company in Philadelphia. They're here. It was also made in collaboration with Upland Film Company. Both are based in Philadelphia, and check them out, and they're really outstanding and speak to sort of the rise of creativity in Philadelphia. Again, here we go. So this is... If I'm to think about a common theme that runs throughout my work and even stems from my childhood, it's the idea of being unafraid to connect across broad disciplines and to not concern oneself with how that's perceived at first, that you might be ahead of the curve, that it's going to face a certain amount of resistance, but eventually, if you persist, perhaps, with any luck, you can derive a new field, a new language, a new way of communicating. I grew up in the north of England, in the Lake District, a region of mountains and lakes. I was exposed to nature at a really early age and was given a ton of freedom actually to explore that unimpeded. Because of my parents' backgrounds, I have a sense of difference and freedom that allowed me to explore. I remember being allowed to go out and just paint flowers, paint trees, rivers, mountains. And there was no bias in terms of what I did, whether it was interested in nature because of nature's sake or because of nature, because of beauty as a potential artist. I think it set up this conversation in my mind that there were no boundaries, that you could be whoever you wanted and do whatever you wanted with care. I think that in part has led to this more sort of polymathic view of life, and that art and science and nature and beauty and technology are all one. What I'm most interested in as a scientist is creating new languages and connections to break down these boundaries, which I think are absolutely essential for the emergence of new fields where we can actually do something really profound together. We established MEDstudio at Jeff about 2 years ago. We made a rule within that studio that the artist, architect, and scientist would be treated equally. And the point there was to imbue the curriculum and the culture with a design sensibility.
And we think design, which is a very human-centered activity that considers the end user consistently, is a valuable tool in helping to establish that new mission, which is one of increasing empathy, creativity, and connectivity. I think if we pay attention to maintaining that process in parallel with a traditional medical curriculum, that it will allow those clinicians to remain in contact with the patient and to remember that they are the end user. And one of the things I'm very fascinated by is the power of spaces to heal. So when we walk into hospitals, we consider the lighting, the floors, the walls, the colors, the sound. They're not great places to get better, even though they try their best. Can we create environments for patients to make them feel safer, whether it's receiving chemotherapy or whether they're in a waiting room, staring at a blank wall and hearing things around them that they shouldn't really be listening to, the chaos, the sound, the worry, the confusion, as we're trying to make them better. This really sparked my interest again in thinking about how medicine could imbue an entire city if it was designed correctly with parks, grass, trees, flowers, pollen, all of these things we probably crave for, we're often starved of, especially in cities. The moment when the rain hits the hot dirt in summer and you get this astonishing, almost euphoric sense of life. What's that about? Well, it turns out that actually in dirt there are bacterium that we are constantly inhaling. If we put our hands in them, they cover our hands, we breathe it in. And these bacterium turn out to have positive effects on our serotonin system, so they actually make us feel good. So we've evolved and co-evolved with dirt to have our hands in it, to nurture it, to feel good about being in it. A couple of years ago, I was at a dinner with Michael Garden and Liz Maley, who are board members at the Friends of the Rail Park in Philadelphia, and they started talking about this wild project to convert this 3-mile strip of abandoned railroad, much bigger than the High Line in New York, broader, longer, it's underground and underground. You crawl through the brush and you end up on a viaduct and you can see the entire city in front of you, and then in either direction the rail park extends through 22 neighborhoods, 50 city blocks, and immediately you can see the potential of, could we, through co-designing or having a voice in that, start to think about how health could be actually designed into the park. One of the things we'd like to do at the educational level is to have this as a space where children can maybe learn about nature and discover science and the arts and humanities in that way, so the park becomes classroom. Design connects people and it exposes people to difference. Without connection and without difference, how do you innovate?
Embracing difference, otherness, that we believe is not only key to innovation within healthcare, but it's also something that art and design brings to the table to improve and perhaps even help fix medicine. So why do we believe that? Well, if most of those around you in med school and in subsequent clinical practice look the same, sound the same, have taken more or less the same science-heavy MCAT-dependent trajectory to get to that place, it's logical to suggest that you'll be less likely to appreciate or even perceive a different perspective. And given the arduous slog of learning and regurgitating known knowledge, which is one of the only fields that does that in a profession, and given the knowledge, spit it back exactly out of context, that defines most med school curricula. It's also likely that your powers of observation and therefore creativity may well be dampened along the way. So although we admit really brilliant students who are highly empathetic and accomplished to start with, we rarely nurture these characteristics once they're in our hands, yet they're clearly starving for this, evidenced by the wide array of societies that they even self-form to fill in the gaps left by their very expensive educations. I need the next slide now, if that will work. Are we doing this now? Okay, I'll let you carry on. I do need some of these pictures, maybe? Yeah, let's move these. Do you want to restart the whole thing? Yeah, I can always restart. So the number of ways that you can change this, you can change the curriculum so that it starts to be more integrated again. and that was changed actually. In 1908, there's a report called the Flexner Report where I think the Carnegie Foundation came in and decided that all of the arts and humanities were going to be removed from medicine. And that was good for some things, like we don't want bloodletting, but that crossover between arts and humanities was removed. So we're left with this science-heavy, materialistic society that is pharmaceutically based and has left us with the system that we have now. So you can change the curriculum, you can start to put art and design back into it, and we can drop things like the MCAT requirements, which are really unnecessary as well. We know that they're bright, there are other ways to get into med school. And we can encourage students to have different backgrounds to apply, and we're doing that too. Or you can even, once they're there, take conventionally admitted students and create things like a design school within the actual school. And I'm glad to say that through various efforts, catalyzed mostly by Mark Tukaczynski, the Dean and Provost at Jefferson, that we've done many of those things. In 2013, we formed MEDstudio to a large part. That wasn't met with great rapture and enthusiasm. And it's really been about training people what it's like to be around designers, that architecture takes as long as it does to qualify as medicine, as do many of the other professions. That these are professions in their own rights and they're to be taken seriously. And that we don't have to just teach high art because we're at medical school. I often hold up a copy of Science magazine and People and say, which one do you read? And they'll go, Science. Well, I read People magazine as well. And how much truth is in each? Oh, that's just, Science is all true, and it's about 20% of it's actually true, probably about the same as in People magazine. And my point is that, this high-low culture stuff, thank you very much, is something we're very aware of not breeding, because it puts people off who've never entered into that world. Maybe People magazine or Vogue is the way in, anyway. So we've done, in order to sort of, these are my original notes. Where am I now? Catching up. That was the response that I got when I used to go and show these efforts, these white papers to the deans and provosts. It was like, okay. It's changed dramatically, though, in the last couple of years. So we've established the first design unit within a US medical school, and it's rooted really in this extreme collaboration and work that I did in LabStudio with Janie Sabin. I'm going to talk about that quickly. I hope I get a few more minutes after that debacle. And the aim is that we're going to create a highly creative army of engineers in scrubs or designers with scalpels. So this whole crossover. And in a very exciting move, if everything goes well, we'll actually be merging with Philadelphia University in the fall, which is obviously a historic institution steeped in design, and we're really looking forward to that. So quickly, how did I get here? Oh, these are all out of sync now. These are some of the things we do at MEDstudio. We've taken medical students, for example, on studio tours and introduced them to new technologies such as rapid fabrication and manufacturing. This is at NextFab. Whoops. This is going to be funny. We do workshops. This is an idea-based workshop of design thinking. Not the biggest fan of design thinking because it stimulates immediate attention, but it doesn't seem to have the longevity that real studio practice obviously has. But we do it anyway. We have summer programs. This is one on graphic medicine, teaching medical students to cartoon. And this was an amazing moment, actually, where we asked doctors to describe an event that they hadn't really processed psychologically, death of a patient, and more than one person in that room who drew it rather than had ever written about it, and they had written about it obviously as reporting it, became very emotional. And as soon as they saw the pictures with the words that they'd created, it became a very different scenario. And I teach in the medical school. I have 1 or 2 lectures a year on design. As well. So we put this work out into the public field. We've been fortunate enough to show at Design Philadelphia for the last couple of years, and we have a very big event, 10-day event this year as part of that, and I'll describe that soon. So it really started my work. Robin Dinterman is here. She's my oldest friend in the States. When I moved from Cambridge to Berkeley and lived in a real live-work space in West Oakland just after the freeways had collapsed post-earthquake, and found myself in this very different environment. You can't get more different than that from Queens College. And met along the way a woman called Geneviève Dion, a textile designer. And this has really started this is the real start of my long-standing collaboration with textile and fashion through her. And for 15 years, we spent significant amounts of time in one another's worlds. And the ability, I really think, to critique without consequence, the increasing acceptance of science, especially chemistry in her work, and the sort of full embracing of intuition as an equal partner of logic, resulted in a crossover and realization that we had value in each other's work. She's now a professor and director of the Shimashiki Oat Lab at Drexel, which focuses on the development of advanced smart materials and textiles and apparel, including those being developed for patients, which is where we come in. So today, Geneviève has a lab within a fashion school, and I have a studio within a med school, whereas I used to have a lab in a med school. And we collaborate by co-supervising students, including a young engineer who's not here today, currently a Drexel co-op student. So we've got this kind of total crossover happening through these types of collaborations. And so much so that together with MIT, Drexel, and Philadelphia University, and a bunch of other institutions, we were recently awarded a portion of a $300 million grant to reinvigorate the US textile industry through the development of smart fibers. This one is one of Genevieve's. It collects power. So the idea here is it's not to make here's the garment and here's the smart, not so smart, and you smack it on there and that's the smart wearable. It's actually to make the fibers the computer. So the device is the garment, it is the wearable. Also, interestingly, I think Apple have just hired the ex-CEO of Yves Saint Laurent for something. Well, clearly it's going to be about wearables, because they know that if it's not wearable, if it's not comfortable, if it's not prescriptive, then it isn't going to work. So this is the network which we're a part of. I'm going to skip over that. So the other thing that happens is that now, in my world, fashion now becomes muse. Hey? You can't avoid that. So because relationships in these sorts of collaborations need to be bidirectional and open-ended. So the point here is not to be afraid of the response that you may receive when you present this type of work to a committee of medical deans, again, who's deciding your fate, and you show them a Kate Moss runway show. I mean, an Alexander McQueen runway show with Kate Moss appearing as a hologram, or a Hussein Chalayan show showing dresses that dissolve when hydrated. But why can't we imagine these same mechanisms being applied to personalized telemedicine, where the doctor could appear before you, or the production of medical garments that solubilize either upon water or gas exposure, upon contact with a virulent reagent? They're just ideas, but they're catalyzed by fashion, and they're definitely worthy of discussion. So if we'd not had that, allowed that sort of reciprocal exposure and vulnerability to happen, none of the subsequent work would have happened, I'd say. And certainly, I wouldn't have just walked one day from my lab, which used to be over here at the Institute for Medicine and Engineering, into the Penn Graduate School of Design, where I met Cecil Balmond, great structural engineer, and then eventually Helene Fourian, who's in the audience, part of Parallax, and then Jenny Sabin, with whom I formed the Sabin-Jones Lab Studio. So the crux of that now larger experiment with Jenny, which ran for over 7 years, was to pair graduate students in architecture with postdoctoral students and fellows in the lab. And simultaneously, we ran a graduate elective seminar studio within the School of Design, which had no specific rules except there were to be no hierarchies. The designer was treated equally to the scientist and vice versa. And another requirement was that participants were to rigorously learn about one another's work and approaches in order to generate a common new language, and ultimately to produce theories and models that would change the way we thought about one another and our respective fields. And it sounds simple, but these types of collaborations, they're really difficult if you do them properly. They rely upon friendship, actually, a lot of trust, You can put a bunch of clinicians and designers together in a room and get them to make something in an afternoon. And I would say, actually, if one of them pairs up, that's good enough. But we can do better than that. We can really do something more rigorous through these types of collaborations. So they're hard, they require vulnerability and trust, and they're inherently risky, and they're loaded with failure, and that's something that's avoided in medical school. So it's actually a good thing to learn how to fail, though. So yeah, when they work, the results can be hopefully breathtaking. This is actually the first day of having a graduate group of architects in my lab. And many of these have gone on to continue this work. Actually, the woman at the front, Erica Savick, she's a prime example. She started off as a Stanford finance student, graduated from Stanford, came to Penn, did a master's degree in architecture, became completely entranced with cell biology and cancer in my lab, went off and did a PhD in cancer biology at Stanford, and has just graduated 2 weeks ago, using her visualization skills and also empathy skills to imagine and redesign the spaces of healing for cancer patients, which is something we're very interested in. So those loops are happening. They take a long time, but they're, we believe, quite important. Other projects. So we founded MEDstudio, 84 students over 5 years. Many different types of exhibitions and papers. A lot of funding came out of this. I think we gathered over $15 million worth of federal and other funding over that time, which was unusual at that point. And little did we know that, say, by studying the structure of breast cancer cells, these formed in my lab, that we'd be able to think of new ways. And this is not a one-to-one biomimetic system, but new ways of thinking about structure and materiality in architecture, and equally so, new ways of visualizing data. This kind of hieroglyphic here looks at the way in which cells move through time. There's a cell on the bottom moving through time over hours, and we were interested in, does my cell move the same way as your cell or her cell? What happens if you put a drug onto that is a tested drug? Can you modulate that behavior to, say, control behavior? And this is the first, at least at this scale, example of being able to discern very minute differences in cell behavior in a tissue culture dish in response to an environmental factor. And that didn't come out of science. That came from an architect's mind and script. So that shows you that, and it's quantitative. So this bidirectionality is really important. We're also interested in surfaces and how those can be manipulated either at the level of a cell on the bottom right. This is a cell placed on a bed of needles, which it moves around to normalize its force network. And we've applied that to thinking about how, at the nanoscale, surfaces of buildings through architect-style production can be manipulated in response to, say, human contact. And these two pictures I'm particularly happy about, just because these are architectural constructs that appear on the covers of fairly prestigious science magazines. So again, just bringing that idea that design, in this case architectural design, can have a place and speak to scientists. Jenny Sabin currently is exhibiting this pavilion. It's a light-producing, emitting and heat-producing pavilion at the Cooper Hewitt National Design Museum. And the reason I show it, it's the centerpiece of that exhibit, the beauty exhibit. The reason I show it is that this fall, as part of Design Philadelphia for 10 days, we've commissioned her to create a large beacon structure which is going to be interactive. It's going to be conveying and transforming in response to your, hopefully if the technology holds up, in response to our questions and your needs. So October 10th, October 6th to the 16th, it'll be there for 10 days. Just quickly, another, again, I said I wouldn't talk to you about necessarily about product, more about process. We're also very interested in, if you'd seen that on the video, the spaces of healing. And we coupled with the Maggie centers, at least through conversation in England, these are a series of pro bono generated buildings that are attached to national health hospitals that really ask the question of, can space heal? So everything from, as I said, the lighting, which is designed to stimulate serotonin, to the spaces into which people look and occupy and look outside of. These are very, very different from a conventional hospital, and we're hoping to prototype more of these spaces in a studio with Philadelphia University starting in fall, where we'll be using the cancer support community, a national network of cancer hospitals, as a paradigm for that model. This is just one of those last slides to really talk about the healing power of architecture. This is a drawing that James Dyson, the vacuum cleaner guy, made for a neonatal intensive care unit in Bath, at the Royal Bath Hospital. He walked in there and he was asked to redesign it, and he just, as a designer, noticed three things. Obviously, he's really obsessed by sound, or the lack of sound. He said it's too noisy, and it's too dark, and what's with these plasticky, shiny colors and floors to maintain hygiene, of course. So he just changed those three things. He opened up the windows, he dampened the sounds, and he changed the colors of the walls in this new building. And the children who were placed in those incubators transited through, I think it was 63% faster than before, or in controls. So those design tweaks allowed that to happen. Probably running out of time. As I said, we're working with cancer support community through a studio with Philly U starting in fall to try and recapitulate or rethink some of those ideas. And with that, I think I'm 10 minutes over with all of the other technical difficulties. I just wanted to check in to us on MEDstudio. You can see the actual projects there. I hope the message today was more about the journey and how collaboration can happen. My crew are here if you want to talk to them, but please drop in. We're in Thomas Jefferson University Hospital on the second floor, Thompson 244. Just contact us, come and visit us, and have a part in this voice. And we hope to see you at the Beacon, which will be launched on the 6th of October. Thank you very much. Thanks.